Hello, and welcome to the next unit, Unit 5. It's all about if statements. Specifically, an example of an if statement in English. If I am hungry, I eat something. If I am tired, I go to sleep. If it's dark, turn a light on. If you can't hear the song, make it louder. In Java, or most computing languages actually, there is an equivalent statement, the if statement. If whatever you have in the parentheses is true, execute the code that comes after it. So there will be something in here that can evaluate to true or false. After that, there will be some code to be executed if it is true. If it's not, you skip that part of the code and move on. Continue. So an if statement is a block of code associated with a condition. The condition is what's inside the parentheses. The block of code that comes after will execute once if it's true, and not at all. It'll be skipped over if what's inside the parentheses, the condition, is false. For example, written in Java style, the word if starts the statement, and the condition, the thing that's true or false, is in parentheses. After that is a chunk of code. If the condition is true, you execute that code. If it's not, you skip over it. And in any case, you continue on with the code that follows it regardless. Now, to be clear, the word Boolean means something that is either true or false. The fact that 10 equals 10 is true. Okay. Is a number odd? Well, that's either true or false. Is a number even? Well, that's either true or false. So let's start off with the first program called if1. Again, that is from the demo code. And let's take a look at it. Right. So we have a variable called 1. We set it to the value 109. And we have two possibilities. The first one, if the value of 1 is less than 100, we execute this code. Now it's clearly not, because it's 109, so that code will be skipped over. It will look at this. If the value of 1 is greater than 100, we will execute the code here. It clearly is true, so this is what will be printed out. And if we run the code, again, since the value of the variable 1 is 109, it is greater than 100, so the second statement is true. If we were to change it, make it 99, what would be different? Well, now this statement is the one that's true, and so this piece of code is what will be executed. Just to demonstrate that, it's less than 100, which is executed because this part of the code is true. The value is less than 100, so we execute that statement. Now, you'll notice we had a test of relationship in here. Is it less than 100? All the conventional mathematical expressions like that are available. We have greater than, less than. Greater than or equal to has to be expressed as two separate keystrokes because there is no greater than or equal to key, just like less than or equal to. And we can also choose not equal to. That exclamation point in most computer languages, including Java, means not. So it's called a bang sometimes. So the exclamation point equal means not equal to. Now, something you will see several times during this talk, if you want to check to see if two things are equal, you'll need a double equal sign. We'll see examples of that again, but if you see two equal signs together, that's checking to see if x equals y. And again, it's true or not. so it can be a condition. So let's go to if1 SAT. Okay. So what we have here, okay, we set the variable to called SAT score. We set it equal to 2400. Okay. How do you check to see if it's equal to that value? With the double equal sign. So if it is equal to 2400, we will execute this piece of code. If it is less than 600, we will execute this piece of code. And again, we made it equal to 400. We compile it. We compile it. Okay. It's equal to, here with the single equal sign is where we make it equal to 2400. Here with the double equal sign is where we check to see if it's equal to 2400. And when you run it, sure enough, since it's equal to 2400, it runs that bit of code. Right. So be sure and notice this double equal sign. Right? That is how you check to see that two numbers are equal. The single equal sign is how you force two things to be equal, also known as assigning a value. And that works with numbers, with integers, right? If you have a string, there's a special command to check to see if two strings are equal. Now, strangely enough, it is called the equals method. Okay. So we have string 1 here. We assign it a value. Here we're checking to see, is it the same? Is it equal to the string it? If it is, we'll execute this print line. Okay. If it is equal to, if it is the same as this string here, we'll execute this print line. We compile it and run it. Okay. Since we made it equal to big, okay, this equals returns true. String 1 is in front of the dot. Okay. It is equal to the string big, so this is true. It executes this piece of code. If I change it to it, compile it, what happens then? Well, then this one is the one that's true. String 1 equals IT, so this will be executed. If it's none of the above, okay, if it's none of the above, if it's neither of those two, we get no output because neither of these is true. It's not equal to it. It's not equal to big. Thus, neither of those are true. Neither of those print lines will be executed. It has to be exactly equal to. It is case sensitive. Okay? The letters have to be in the same order. Okay? But if they are identical character for character, this equals command, this equals method will return true. If they're different in any way, it will return false. So again, if you're comparing two strings, dot equals is the way to do that. Okay. And the syntax. You have a name for one string here, dot equals, and in here you can either have a string in quotes or the name of some other string. And again, it will return true if they're exactly the same. And again, it is case sensitive. Okay. So let's move on to the next one, which deals with a Boolean variable. integers can have billions of values. Doubles can have, I don't know how many values. A Boolean is something that has exactly two values. It's either true or it's false. And that's what makes it so useful for an if statement. If something's true, we execute the if. If something's false, we skip over it. Let's go into if Boolean. Right. So when you declare something Boolean, you can give it exactly one of two values. Either it is literally true, T-R-U-E, or false, F-A-L-S-E. Okay. So right now, this variable isOdd is declared to be true, and we have an if statement. If it's true, execute that, so that piece of code will be executed. Okay. isOdd, because isOdd double equals true. If I make it false, okay, then it's not equal to true, clearly, because it's equal to false. This piece of code will not be executed. No output because this is not true. So again, a Boolean variable is something, it's either true or it's false. There is no middle ground. If I set it equal to anything else, for example, make it equal to 0, right? I get an error message. Right? A Boolean can't be a 0, it can't be a number, it can't be a string. It's either true or it's false. So again, it checks to see, is that Boolean variable true? If it is, I print out. Now, if it's already Boolean, right, that means it has to be either true or false. I can actually save myself a little work inside the parentheses here. Let me show you what I mean. Notice I just have isOdd. So it's checking to see, is what's in here true? Well, it is true, so it's going to execute what comes next. Okay. So you don't actually need the double equals true, right? Since it only has two values, true or false, it's just going to check to see if it's true. Again, if it's false, what's in here will not be executed. Okay. I get no output because this is not true. Now, if I add something else afterwards, what comes afterwards will actually be executed regardless of the truth or false. Only the part in the braces here depends on the truth. What comes after that will be executed regardless. So, since isOdd is equal to false, it will not execute here, but it will continue on after the brace and execute the rest of the program. So we get the continue part because that's outside of the braces, not dependent on the if statement, and thus this part in here depends upon the if statement. Anything after it, however, does not. Okay. So again, you don't actually, if you have a Boolean inside the parentheses, you don't need to set it to check to see if it's equal to true. That's what an if statement does. It checks to see if that's true. If nesting, you can put an if statement inside another if statement, and it will check consecutively to see if they're true. Bring this back to the original state. So nested ifs. You can have one if inside of another. So for example, we have if num is greater than 2. Well, in this case, that's true. So we're going to go inside and execute what's inside here. Well, what's inside there is another if statement. So in order to get here, the first condition was true, right? So we know that num is greater than 2. Right? You only get to this code here if the first condition was true. So then we'll check to see if it's less than 10. If this is true, that means what? Well, it means that num was greater than 2 and num is less than 10. So what should it do? Well, it prints that out. Less than 2 greater than 2, less than 10. Okay. Also inside the code, well, let's run that. Num equals 7. So what happens? Well, num is greater than 2, so that's true, so it comes in here. If num is less than 10, that's true. It's going to execute this piece of code. Okay, so again, greater than 2, less than 10. Suppose we change num to 11. Well, it's still greater than 2, so we're going to enter into this chunk of code. But this part is not true, so it won't execute this part at all. It will, however, continue on. It'll check to see if num is greater than 10. Since it is, it will execute that line of code. So it's there really have to be two things true. The outside to get here in the first place, and then the inside to get to that system out print line. And if we compile it and we run it, we notice we get greater than 2, greater than 10. That statement here. Now, let's make num equal to 1. Feel free to guess what's going to happen. Num is not greater than 2, so it's going to ignore this entire piece of code. So we get, well, what do we get? We get nothing, no output, because none of these print lines were ever seen because we never entered that piece of code. Now again, if we have something outside here, what will happen? Num is not greater than 2, so it ignores everything in the braces, but it will continue on and execute whatever happens after those braces. So, hence we get that last print line, ignoring everything here, but we do execute whatever follows. Okay. So again, to recap, if num is greater than 2, we go inside. So you only get to see any of this code if the first condition is true. This part will only happen if both greater than 2 and less than 10 are true. This part will only happen if greater than 2 and greater than 10 are true. And then whatever happens afterwards, outside those braces, that will happen regardless of the truth of the condition. Now, I want you to notice there were no braces on some of that. Let's go back to where we were. Okay. This if statement doesn't have any braces after it. And you can do that if you only want to execute one statement. So if the number is less than 10, Do that one thing and then move on. You can leave out braces if you only have one statement to execute. If num is greater than 10, execute that one statement and then continue. Again, if it's only one statement, you don't need braces. It's as though this were all one statement. If number is less than 10, print out this thing. If number is greater than 10, print out this one thing. It's all one statement, just has a semicolon at the end. You don't need braces unless you have more than one line after the if statement, like this one does. Good. So that one line gets executed if the condition is true. It still gets ignored if it's not true. Now, some things to watch out for. First of all, Java's case sensitive. If is lowercase I and then an F. And a mistake many people make. If you have something with scoped off with braces, you don't want a semicolon there. That semicolon will cause this whole chunk of code to be ignored. The other common error, you need a double equal sign if you're checking to see if something's equal. What this statement does is make total equal to 10. If you want to check to see if it's equal to 10, you need a second equal sign, double equal. So an if statement should always have a double equal, not a single. Okay. And again, a common mistake, never put a semicolon before an open brace. That's what this is about. We have a semicolon right before an open brace. When you do that, it ignores everything in the braces. So you have a semicolon or you have a brace, you don't have both. Okay. So in class, we're going to do Lab 5, questions A through E. If you want a quick check for understanding, feel free to do the first one just to see if you've got the hang of the syntax and the logic of the if statement. That's all for now. I'll see you in class next time.